A soldier, Daniel, returns a bracelet to Lorraine, now a powerful CEO, that she lost during a violent incident in their old neighborhood 20 years earlier. The reunion unearths painful truths. A friend died protecting her, and Daniel enlisted to escape the chaos. Returning the bracelet becomes a catalyst for both to confront guilt, grief, and forgotten hope. As Daniel transitions out of the military, Lorraine helps him rebuild his life, and their bond deepens into mutual healing. The bracelet, once a symbol of loss, becomes a symbol of renewal as they choose a shared future grounded in truth and possibility. The sky over Atlanta carried a strange, bruised kind of light the morning the soldier stepped off the bus. It wasn't the color of storm or sunrise, but something in between, an unsettled gray that seemed to hang heavy with unspoken memory. He noticed it immediately, because 20 years earlier, on the day everything began, the sky looked exactly the same. That coincidence alone made his pulse tighten as he adjusted the small velvet pouch in his pocket, the one he had carried across continents, through firefights, deserts, and darkened outposts where silence felt like a second enemy. The pouch weighed almost nothing, yet he had never felt anything heavier. His name was Staff Sergeant Daniel Brooks, a man who had learned how to survive without needing to know why. But this morning, as he crossed the parking lot and headed toward the glass tower that housed one of the most influential companies in the country, he finally understood the weight of unfinished stories. The bracelet had been lost 2 decades ago. Lost by a woman who should have forgotten it by now. Lost in a place no one cared to remember. But she hadn't forgotten. And neither had he. He paused at the building's entrance, staring at the reflection of a tired soldier gazing back. The man in the glass looked older than his 38 years, sun-beaten, scar-marked, shadow-eyed from years of war that never quite left the bloodstream. Yet his gaze softened when he touched the pouch again. It wasn't the object itself, but the promise attached to it that had kept him going through nights when he doubted his own voice. Today, the promise would be kept. Inside, the lobby swelled with the quiet hum of corporate precision, heels on marble, the distant murmur of elevators, the polite tone of guarded greetings. Daniel didn't belong here, not among people dressed in ambition and certainty. But belonging wasn't what brought him. He approached the reception desk with the steady gait of a man walking back into a memory rather than a skyscraper. "I'm here to see Ms. Lorraine Carter," he said, his voice low but firm. The receptionist blinked, searching her calendar. Lorraine Carter, CEO of Carter Innovations, one of the most powerful black executives in America, a woman known for her unshakable composure and meteoric rise. A woman who no longer had time for strangers. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked. "No," he replied. "But she'll want to see me." The receptionist offered the polite corporate smile that meant the opposite. She began dialing, then paused as Daniel removed a small envelope from his jacket. He slid it across the desk. "Give her this," he said softly. "Please." She hesitated before taking it. There was something in his voice, an undertow of history, of weariness, of absolute sincerity, that made argument feel disrespectful. She opened the envelope cautiously, pulling out a faded photograph. A young woman stood in its center, smiling in the sunlight of a world that didn't exist anymore. Her hand rested on the shoulder of a teenage boy in uniform, a youth program uniform, not military. The photo edges were softened by time, but the likeness was unmistakable. I'll let her know," the receptionist said, her composure shifting into uncertainty. Daniel stepped aside, keeping his posture rigid. The minutes stretched, and he felt the familiar battle between patience and dread begin to coil in his chest. He remembered the first time he had seen Lorraine Carter, not the CEO, but the woman she used to be, Lorraine Patterson, a college student volunteering at a community program in a neighborhood everyone forgot except those forced to live there. She had been sunlight then, warm and effortless, a force of hope so unexpected he had believed, for the first time, that the future might be something he deserved to witness. But hope had a short lifespan in their neighborhood. And 20 years ago, on a day shadowed by violence and confusion, she lost the bracelet she treasured most. Daniel found it moments before everything collapsed. And in that chaos, he made a vow, a private vow known only to him, that one day he would return it. A chime sounded. The receptionist straightened. "Ms. Carter will see you now." Daniel's heartbeat changed rhythm. He was escorted to a private elevator whose walls reflected the city shrinking beneath them as it ascended. The silence in that rising chamber felt ceremonial, A cleansing pause before something irreversible. When the doors opened, he stepped into an office floor washed with warm light and modern restraint. Glass walls. Dark wood. Air that held the faint scent of jasmine and paper. At the far end of the room, a woman stood facing the skyline, tall, poised, wrapped in a stillness that spoke of battles won long before reaching the boardroom. Lorraine Carter turned slowly, and Daniel saw the years etched in delicate, dignified lines across her face. Yet her eyes, sharp, searching, unyieldingly expressive, were exactly as he remembered. She studied him, recognition flickering like a distant flame fighting wind. Then she spoke, her voice quiet but steady, the kind of voice that could silence or soften an entire room. "Daniel Brooks," she said. "I never thought I'd see you again." He swallowed, the memory of their last moments layered between them like sediment. "Ma'am," he replied, though she had never been a ma'am to him. "I kept something for you." He removed the velvet pouch with slow, deliberate hands. For a second, neither moved. The room felt smaller, heavier, as though time itself were holding its breath. He opened the pouch and revealed a delicate gold bracelet, the charm worn but intact, the metal carrying the faint scratches of 2 decades of survival. Lorraine inhaled sharply, her composure fracturing for the first time in years. "That's impossible," she whispered. "I lost that. The night." "Yes," he said. "I know." The bracelet shimmered between them, a small relic of a story neither had spoken aloud in 20 years, a story that had shaped them both in ways the world could not see. And as the weight of it settled into the quiet, both of them understood that this was only the beginning. Lorraine didn't move at first. She simply stared at the bracelet resting in Daniel's calloused palm, as if the years between then and now were collapsing all at once. The office around them, its polished edges, its modern geometry, its quiet hum of controlled importance, seemed to fall away, leaving only 2 people connected by a night long buried under ambition, survival, and silence. She stepped closer, her heels whispering across the wood floor, but her voice carried a tremor she couldn't disguise. "I thought it was gone forever," she murmured. "I tried not to think about it, not to think about any of it." Daniel nodded, but he didn't release the bracelet. "Not yet. Some things don't stay buried," he said softly. "Not when they're tied to promises." She met his eyes, and for the first time since rising to the top of an industry that doubted her at every turn, Lorraine felt the ground underneath her tilt. She wasn't the CEO in this moment. She wasn't the woman featured in magazines or interviewed on stages. She was the 20-year-old volunteer who used to come home with dust on her jeans and hope on her tongue, believing she could change the shape of a broken neighborhood through compassion alone. She had been fearless then, or naive enough to pretend she was. The bracelet had been her mother's. Lorraine had worn it the day she entered the community center for the first time, meeting teenagers who seemed older than their years and younger than their age. One of them had been Daniel, 15, quiet, watchful, like a boy studying the world from behind invisible armor. She remembered his eyes before she remembered anything else. He carried too much knowledge for someone so young. Now, standing in front of her, he carried something else, ghosts. "Why didn't you ever come back?" she asked. Daniel looked past her, toward the skyline. "I tried," he said. "But things changed when the shooting happened. The neighborhood, it spiraled. People scattered. And then, you enlisted," she finished. He nodded. "It was the only way out." Lorraine exhaled slowly, as if releasing the dust of a memory that still stung. "I looked for you," she admitted. "After the chaos. After the sirens. I asked around, but no one knew where you went." "You weren't supposed to find me," he said. "Not then." For a moment, the air thickened with unspoken layers: fear, loss, gratitude, guilt. Lorraine took the bracelet gently, her fingers brushing the warm metal that had traveled further than she could ever understand. She held it to her chest, closing her eyes. "What happened that night?" she finally whispered. "You were there. You saw everything. I never got the full truth." Daniel hesitated. His shoulders stiffened in the way soldiers do when old wounds threaten to break open. "Are you sure you want to know?" She opened her eyes and met his steady gaze. "I've spent 20 years trying to forget something I never truly understood." "Yes, I want to know." Daniel's jaw tightened. "We should sit." They moved to the small seating area near the window, two low chairs, a table between them, and a view of the city stretching like a mosaic of ambition and regret. Lorraine sat with the poise of a leader preparing for impact. Daniel sat like a man bracing against the recoil of memory. "It started earlier that day," Daniel began. "The tension had been building for weeks. The rival crew, Corner Kings, they were pushing into our block. They wanted control. Money. Fear. The usual currency." Lorraine flinched, remembering the coded warnings students whispered when they thought she couldn't hear. She had tried to brush the danger aside back then, too stubborn to admit how naive she really was. "That afternoon," Daniel continued, "you stayed late at the center. You were helping Jamila with her scholarship essays. You remember?" Lorraine nodded. "She was brilliant. So quiet, but brilliant." "She got out," Daniel said. "College. Married. Oregon. She made it." A small smile touched Lorraine's lips, unexpected, fragile. "I'm glad." Daniel's voice darkened. "But that day, when you left the center, two of the Kings were waiting outside. They weren't there for you. They were looking for Dre." Lorraine's pulse quickened. Dre, Daniel's closest friend, a boy with too much anger and not enough time. He had been mouthing off, Daniel said, trying to act bigger than he was. He wasn't ready for the world he was stepping into. "And the Kings wanted to make a point," Lorraine whispered. Daniel nodded. "Dre ran toward the old laundromat. You followed. I don't know why. Maybe because you were trying to help. Maybe because you thought they wouldn't hurt someone like you." Lorraine looked down at her hands. "I thought if I could just talk to them." "You couldn't," Daniel said gently. "They didn't see you as someone to talk to. They saw you as a witness." The memory sharpened behind his eyes. "I saw them corner you both," Daniel said. "I was across the street. I ran. I yelled. Dre shoved you. You fell. That's when the bracelet slipped off." Lorraine felt her breath catch. "And the gun?" "It wasn't pointed at Dre," Daniel said quietly. "It was pointed at you." Dre grabbed the guy's arm, and the shot fired into the air. People started screaming. Then another gun came out. That one was aimed at Dre. Lorraine's voice trembled. "He didn't survive." "No," Daniel said. "But he saved you." The words settled like ash. Lorraine blinked back tears, her voice breaking. "Why didn't anyone tell me the whole truth? I only heard bits. Rumors. That Dre was in the wrong place at the wrong time." "He was," Daniel said. "But he chose to be there. He saw you fall. He didn't hesitate." Lorraine pressed a hand over her mouth, shoulders trembling. "I should have done more. I should have." "You were 20, Daniel said, firm but gentle. "You were trying to help. None of this was your fault." Lorraine looked at him through tears. "But you, how did you get the bracelet?" "When you fell, it landed near the curb," Daniel said. "I grabbed it before running to you. But after the shots fired, everything went wild. Sirens. People scattering. I never had a chance to give it back. And you kept it all these years." Daniel nodded. "It was a reminder of where I came from, of promises, of the people who didn't make it out." Lorraine wiped her eyes slowly. "Why return it now?" Daniel leaned back, the weight of his years in the military pressing through his voice. "Because I'm tired of carrying ghosts that aren't mine. And because you should have the chance to finish a story you never knew you started." Lorraine stared at the bracelet shimmering in her palm, a symbol of innocence, loss, courage, and unfinished truth. Outside the window, the same bruised sky hung over Atlanta, as if waiting for the past to speak its final word. And Lorraine realized the story she tried to leave behind had finally returned, asking to be acknowledged before it could be forgiven. The afternoon light shifted across the office floor, sliding from gold to a muted amber that softened the edges of everything it touched. Lorraine felt the warmth on her skin, but not the comfort. The bracelet lay in her palm like a small, glowing truth that refused to dim. Daniel's voice still echoed in the space between them. Dre saving her, the gun, the chaos, the weight of 2 decades collapsing into a single retold moment. She exhaled a trembling breath, feeling the past stirring in a way she had spent years avoiding. Daniel sat across from her, his posture still straight, still disciplined, but something in his shoulders seemed to loosen now that the truth had been spoken aloud. Yet Lorraine sensed there was more, something he hadn't said, something sitting behind his steady eyes like a door half closed. "What happened after?" she asked softly. "After the shooting. After I left the neighborhood." Daniel looked out the window, his eyes following the distant horizon as if searching for a point of origin. "It got worse," he said. "The violence. The fear. People started making lists. Who was safe, who wasn't, who might not make it another week. Dre's death wasn't the beginning, but it was a spark. A big one." Lorraine listened, the guilt curling inside her chest in slow, aching patterns. "I kept my head down for a while," Daniel continued. "But the Kings didn't forget that I interfered. They cornered me one night behind the school. Told me I owed them. Owed the neighborhood. Owed the code." He shook his head, exhaling sharply. "That was the night I decided to disappear." "You enlisted," she whispered again, though this time the word carried a different weight, less fact, more understanding. He nodded. "I walked into the recruitment office the next morning. Told them I needed a new life. They didn't ask too many questions." "And the bracelet?" she asked. Daniel's fingers curled reflexively, as though he could still feel it tucked against his chest beneath his uniform. "I kept it with me through basic, through my first deployment, through everything. It reminded me that someone once believed I could be more than the neighborhood predicted. That someone saw something in me worth saving." Lorraine's throat tightened. "Daniel, I didn't save you." "No," he said, meeting her eyes. "But you saw me. Sometimes that's enough." Silence settled again, not heavy, but reflective, like the hush inside a church after the final hymn. Lorraine turned the bracelet over between her fingers, tracing the tiny engraved initials, MP, for her mother, Miriam Patterson. "She gave this to me the day I left for college," Lorraine said. "Told me it would carry me through whatever I didn't think I was ready for." "Sounds like she knew you well," Daniel said. "She did." Lorraine's voice softened. "She passed 10 years ago. I thought she'd be alive long enough for me to tell her I found it again. I thought maybe—" She shook her head. "Never mind." Daniel leaned forward slightly. "What were you going to say?" Lorraine hesitated, trying to translate the ache in her chest into words. "I thought maybe finding the bracelet would close something. A door. A wound. A memory I never resolved. But now that it's here, it feels like it opened more instead." Daniel nodded slowly. "That's how the past works. It doesn't close until it's ready." She gave a faint, almost bitter laugh. "And who decides when it's ready?" "Maybe we do," Daniel said. Lorraine looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since he'd arrived. The soldier in front of her wasn't the teenager from the community center anymore, but there were pieces of that boy in him still. The quiet intensity, the guarded sensitivity, the instinct to protect even when he didn't have the words for it. She leaned back, folding the bracelet in her palm. "Tell me something," she said. "Why now? Why come find me after all this time? You could have mailed it. You could have let it stay a memory." Daniel's jaw flexed, not tense, but conflicted. "Because I needed to see that it mattered," he said. "That it wasn't just a symbol I was holding on to. That returning it would mean something to you." "It does," she said immediately, surprising herself with the force of it. "It means more than you know." His voice lowered. "I wasn't sure." There was a vulnerability in his tone she hadn't expected, shadows behind his words that suggested battles he hadn't mentioned, internal ones, quieter but no less scarring. Lorraine felt a pull in her chest, an instinctive thread of empathy. "You said you were tired of carrying ghosts," she said. "But I think there's more than just this one. More than this story." Daniel didn't deny it. Instead, he closed his eyes for a moment and exhaled a slow, weighted breath. "I've lost people. Friends. Brothers. Ones I trained, ones I led. Some of them I couldn't save. Some of them I thought I did, until I didn't." Lorraine listened as his voice softened into something raw. "Out there," he continued, "you learn to pack your grief small. You fold it into corners, shove it into pockets, Keep it just light enough to carry. But after a while, those pockets tear. She reached forward without thinking, placing her hand over his. His skin was warm, rough, grounded. You don't have to carry it alone, she said. Daniel opened his eyes, surprised but steady. I didn't come here to put my burdens on you. Maybe not, she said. But maybe you came to return more than a bracelet. For a moment, neither spoke. Their hands remained still, hers soft and trembling, his steady and scarred, and the connection held without discomfort. Something old and unspoken lived there, a shared understanding that didn't need articulation. Finally, Lorraine withdrew her hand gently. What do you want, Daniel? After this. After returning it. He looked at her, quiet for a long moment. I don't know, he admitted. I've been a soldier for so many years. I don't know who I am without the uniform. Then maybe this is your chance to figure it out. It's not that simple. No, she said. But it's possible. Daniel watched her with the same intensity he used to reserve for danger. You believe that? I believe that people can begin again, she said. Even when they don't know how. Outside, the amber light deepened into something richer, like a curtain lowering before the next act. Lorraine held the bracelet once more, feeling the warmth of her mother's memory mixing with the shock of Daniel's return. She looked at him with a clarity she hadn't felt in years. Daniel, she said quietly, I think this story isn't finished yet. He nodded slowly, as if he had known all along she would say that. And in the quiet glow of the fading day, something unspoken shifted inside both of them, a turning point neither could name, but both could feel. Night settled over the city like a slow-falling curtain, turning the skyline into a constellation of glass-lit windows and whispered silhouettes. Lorraine's office, high above the darkening streets, felt suspended between past and present, an elevated liminal space where truth had begun to loosen itself from years of silence. She stood by the window, the bracelet warm in her hand, the city lights reflecting in her eyes like fragments of a story still unfolding. Daniel remained seated behind her, his figure steady in the dim glow of the room, as if anchored by an invisible duty even in stillness. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. It was not silence born of discomfort, but of reverence, an instinctive understanding that something had shifted between them, and naming it too soon would only cause it to fracture. Finally, Daniel rose and joined her at the glass. The window stretched from floor to ceiling, revealing a city humming with ambition, unrest, hope, contradiction, much like the neighborhood where their story began. You built all this, he said quietly. Everything you dreamed of back then. You made it real. Lorraine didn't smile. I don't know if I built all of it, she said. But I survived long enough to climb. She glanced at him. Survival feels different from success, you know? Daniel nodded. Yeah, he said. I do. The faint hum of distant traffic rose like a low tide. Lorraine traced the bracelet with her thumb, feeling the engraving again. MP, when my mother gave me this, she said, she told me it was a reminder to lead with courage, not fear. But the night I lost it, I felt like I failed her. Failed everyone. Daniel leaned slightly closer, his voice calm but unwavering. You didn't fail anyone, Lorraine. You were caught in something violent and senseless. Nothing about that was your doing. She studied his reflection in the window, brooding, steady, carrying the invisible gravity of someone who had seen too much and said too little. You keep saying that, she murmured. Why? Because it's the truth, he said. And because you're still carrying a guilt that never belonged to you. Her jaw tightened. And what about you? She asked. What guilt are you carrying that isn't yours? His eyes lowered, a slow exhale slipping from him. More than I can explain. Try, she said gently. He turned from the window and walked back toward the seating area. Lorraine followed, her footsteps soft but sure. They sat opposite each other again, though the distance between them felt smaller now. Daniel rested his elbows on his knees, hands clasped. I enlisted because I needed to get out. But once I was in, I never stopped running. From the neighborhood. From what happened to Dre. From everything I couldn't control. You were a child, Lorraine reminded him. Children run. He nodded, but his gaze remained distant. Afghanistan. Iraq. Places where running wasn't an option anymore. Men looked to me. Young guys, barely 20. They trusted me to bring them home. He paused, swallowing hard. The overhead lights caught the faint sheen in his eyes. I couldn't always do that. Lorraine's heart clenched. Daniel. There were nights when I'd close my eyes and see them, he continued. Not just the ones we lost, but the ones I couldn't reach in time. And every time, I'd think about the neighborhood again. About Dre. About how maybe the first person I couldn't save was him. Lorraine leaned forward, her voice steady but tender. Saving someone, she said, isn't always about stopping what harms them. Sometimes it's about giving them something worth holding on to. Something that carries them further than they thought they could go. He lifted his gaze to her, searching. What do you mean? You told me the bracelet reminded you that someone believed in you, she said. Daniel, that means you weren't running from Dre. You were running toward the man you became. And you did become someone. Someone honorable. Someone brave. He inhaled slowly, grounding himself. I don't feel brave, he said. Not anymore. Bravery, she said softly, isn't a feeling. It's a choice. And you've been choosing it every day for 20 years. Daniel looked away, hiding the emotion pulling at the edges of his composure. Lorraine felt the urge to bridge the distance between them again, but she held back, this time letting him find his own balance. He finally straightened. There's another reason I came today, he said. Lorraine's pulse quickened. What reason? Daniel hesitated, then reached into his jacket. He pulled out a folded paper, worn, creased, handled too many times. He placed it on the table. Lorraine looked at it, then at him. What is this? Discharge papers, Daniel said quietly. Honorable. Final. Her eyes widened. You're leaving the military? He nodded. I already left. 2 weeks ago. She stared at him, absorbing the magnitude of it. Daniel, that's your whole life. What will you do now? I don't know, he admitted. That's part of why I wanted to see you. I needed to return the bracelet. I needed to close that chapter. And I needed, he paused, choosing his words with care. I needed to see the person who once believed I could be more than the path laid out for me. Lorraine inhaled, her eyes softening. And what did you see? Daniel's voice dropped to a near whisper. Someone who proved it was possible. Emotion surged unexpectedly through her chest, sharp, warm, bittersweet. Daniel, I didn't achieve any of this alone. He shook his head gently. Maybe not. But you showed me what could be. Even back then. Their gazes held. Something deep, familiar, and unspoken pulsed between them. Lorraine found her voice. You know, she said, when I left the neighborhood, I made myself a promise too. I said if I ever had the power to change something, to reach back and help someone climb out, I would. Daniel gave a faint, questioning frown. And you think I'm someone you need to reach back for? No, she said. I think you're someone I want to reach forward with. The words hung in the air, delicate but undeniable. Daniel's breath caught, just slightly. Lorraine. She lifted a hand, stopping him gently. I'm not saying I know what this is, she said softly, or what we're supposed to do with it. I'm just saying that maybe your new beginning doesn't have to be something you figure out alone. He sat back, letting the meaning settle through him. It's been a long time since I've let anyone walk with me, he said. Then we start slow, she replied. The city outside glowed brighter in the deepening night, as if bearing witness to a transformation neither of them had anticipated. Daniel looked at her with a tenderness he hadn't allowed himself in years. Lorraine, what do you want from this? From me. She met his gaze fully. I want honesty, presence, and a chance to finally understand the story we never finished. He nodded, something loosening inside him like a breath he'd been holding for 20 years. Then maybe, he said, voice steady, we finish it together. A softness spread through the room, like the first breeze before dawn. Lorraine closed her fingers around the bracelet, her mother's initials pressing warmly into her skin. For the first time in decades, she felt not just the weight of the past, but the possibility of the future. And the story that had begun in fear and chaos now leaned, unexpectedly, toward hope. Dawn crept into the sky with a kind of quiet determination that felt almost symbolic, painting the horizon in strokes of pale gold and muted rose. Lorraine's office, once cloaked in shadows, began to fill with morning light. It washed over the room like a benediction, gentle, unhurried, warm against the lingering ghosts of the night before. Daniel stood near the window again, watching the sun rise between the skyscrapers, watching the world stir awake as if unaware that two lives had quietly shifted course while it slept. Lorraine watched him from across the room, the bracelet wrapped loosely around her fingers. She saw how the light softened the hard lines of his face, how it warmed the scars etched along his jaw, how it revealed the quiet vulnerability beneath the soldier's rigid composure. The man she once knew as a guarded teenager now stood like someone on the edge of rediscovery, hesitant but ready. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked gently. He glanced at her with a faint, tired smile. "Not really. Too much on my mind." "So you're human after all," she teased softly. He huffed a quiet laugh, rubbing the back of his neck. "I guess so." She walked to him, the bracelet swinging lightly from her fingertips. "You know," she said, "when I woke up this morning, I expected today to be like every other day. Meetings, deadlines, negotiations. And then you showed up and reminded me that life doesn't stay in the boxes we build for it." Daniel looked down at her hand. "Are you sure you want to open that box? The past can bring a lot of weight with it." She met his eyes, steady and unafraid. "I'm not opening a box. I'm closing one, and choosing another path." He studied her expression, as if searching for any hesitation. "Lorraine, I don't want to disrupt the life you've built. I know I'm walking in after decades of absence." "A disruption isn't always a bad thing," she said. "Sometimes it's exactly what we need." Daniel's gaze softened. "And what do you need?" She hesitated, only for a second, before answering. "I need truth, connection, purpose that doesn't rely on titles or success. I need something real." Her voice steadied. "And I think you do too." He exhaled slowly, as if releasing a weight he had carried for far too long. "Maybe I do," he admitted. "But I don't know how to start. I feel like I'm trying to learn a new language after years of battle." "Then we take it step by step," she said. "We learn together." He looked at her with something like wonder, quiet, disbelieving, but hopeful. "I'm not the same boy you knew." "And I'm not the same girl," she replied. "That's the point." They stood in silence, the sunrise casting long shadows across the floor. The moment felt fragile, like a glass ornament suspended in still air, waiting to be held without breaking. Lorraine reached out and gently placed the bracelet into Daniel's hand. "I want you to keep it," she said. He stared at her, startled. "Lorraine, no. This is yours. It belonged to your mother." "And she believed in second chances," Lorraine said softly. "That bracelet survived everything. Neighborhood violence, war zones, years of distance. It made its way back to me because you honored a promise. But now I think it's meant to carry you forward, not just remind you of what came before." Daniel swallowed hard. "I don't know if I can accept that." "You can," she said. "Because it's not a burden anymore. It's a blessing." The sincerity in her voice dismantled the last defenses he'd been holding. He closed his fingers around the bracelet, overwhelmed but steady. "Thank you," he whispered. She smiled faintly. "You're welcome." A knock interrupted the moment. Lorraine's assistant peeked in. "Ms. Carter, the board meeting begins in 20 minutes." Lorraine nodded. "Thank you. I'll be down shortly." When the door closed again, she turned to Daniel. "I have to go for a bit. But afterward, if you're willing, we could talk about what comes next." Daniel nodded. "I'll wait." She paused, her gaze lingering on him with subtle affection. "Good." Lorraine left the office, her footsteps firm with purpose. Daniel remained by the window, tracing the bracelet's charm with his thumb. For the first time in years, he felt the quiet stirrings of possibility, fragile but real, unfolding in his chest like a new dawn. The board meeting ended 2 hours later, but Lorraine's thoughts kept drifting back to Daniel. When she returned to her office, She found him seated on the couch, studying a framed photo of her with her mother. "Beautiful woman," he said without looking up. "She was," Lorraine replied softly. "She taught me strength." "She'd be proud of you," Daniel said. "All of this. You earned it." She sat beside him. "Maybe. But she also taught me something else. Success means little if you lose yourself along the way." He nodded, absorbing the meaning. "And have you lost yourself?" "Pieces," she admitted. "Pieces I didn't realize were missing until you walked in." He turned to her. "I'm not sure what I can give you, Lorraine. I'm still figuring out who I am." "And that," she said, "is exactly what you can give me. Honesty. Presence. Truth." He took a slow breath. "What if I'm still broken?" "Then we will rebuild," she said simply. "Together." He held her gaze, searching for doubt. He found none. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay," she echoed. Something eased inside them, like a long-locked door finally opening. Weeks passed. Then months. Daniel began building a civilian life, quietly, carefully, rebuilding himself piece by piece. Lorraine helped where she could, not by solving his problems, but by standing beside him as he faced them. He met with therapists, enrolled in classes, found a sense of grounding in teaching leadership workshops to at-risk youth, returning to the very cycle that once shaped him, but this time as the anchor instead of the lost boy. Lorraine continued leading her company with clarity and heart, yet now she found balance, space, a softness she had long forgotten. And she discovered that vulnerability didn't weaken her, it strengthened everything she touched. Their connection deepened, not rushed, not forced, built on shared truth and earned trust. And one quiet evening, long after the sun dipped beneath the edge of the skyline, Daniel fastened the bracelet gently around Lorraine's wrist. "I kept it safe," he said. "But it belongs with you now. Not as a reminder of the past, but as a symbol of what comes next." Lorraine's eyes shimmered. "And what comes next?" Daniel took her hand, steady and sure. "Whatever we choose. Together." She smiled, radiant in the dim light. "Then let's choose something beautiful." Outside, the city glowed with a million small lights, each one a possibility waiting to be claimed. And high above the streets where their story began, two lives that had once collided in chaos finally found their way into calm, into hope, into healing, into a future written not by fear, but by grace. The story that started with a lost bracelet ended with something found. A beginning.